Growing up, I knew that my father and the ACLU did meaningful work, but after making this film, I now really understand just what a difference they make and how many lives they've changed.
And although I never would have admitted it growing up, I'm really grateful to have lived in a home so passionate about social justice.
It has been a privilege working with such a talented and hardworking crew and to have met the inspirational people who you are about to hear tell the story of my father and the ACLU over the past 40 years.
I met Mark in 1972. Going on at that moment in history was the case against Dan Ellsberg for printing the Pentagon Papers. There was a young man among all of these very well-known lawyers who often had the most decisive thing to say, who was very wise, it seemed to me. And when I inquired who he was, I was told he was a student. I said, well, he's brilliant.
And as I understand it, Mark was her very first hire.
I said, I want you. I think the ACLU needs you. He went back to law school and came out here immediately after he graduated. What Mark and I did together was to push the limits of the ACLU.
Homelessness, immigrants, public education. Those issues for many parts of the ACLU were controversial. Is it or is it not a civil liberties issue? For Mark, it was always clearly a human rights issue.
The Williams case stands out. Mark pushed it.
You can argue about all the things that schools should be and should do, but at their core, they have to at least have certain basic essentials.
It was really about just going up and down the state and talking to students and talking to teachers and talking to parents.
We had a client who told a story of the night before a math test having to actually pull a name out of a hat to see who got to take home a book. In every classroom in the state of California, there's a tangible evidence of the Williams settlement. Because of Mark and because of the ACLU, we're there to stand with them to ensure that those rights are enforced.
I have heard him countless times when a lawyer is trying to talk about an issue or a case that they'd like to bring, and they start talking about the legal principles at the beginning. And Mark says, no, 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 no. We can always figure out the legal principle later, but we've got to have a compelling narrative at the outset.
A record number of individual issues placed directly on the ballot. One of the most controversial, California's immigration initiative, Proposition 187.
Prop 187 was the first law targeting undocumented immigrants.
The initiative, which would deny schooling and other social services to illegal immigrants, sparked student protests again today in Los Angeles.
It would have been such a different California had 187 been put in place.
In a Los Angeles federal courtroom, civil rights lawyers and the state of California clashed over whether Proposition 187 is constitutional.
Mark was able to do something incredibly powerful to stop it from ever happening.
Showing us that these kinds of injustices can be overcome, but you have to have someone who's a strategist like Mark to fight it in court.
The problem are the separate and unequal systems that are being used to deal with race. And separate and unequal under the 14th Amendment shouldn't come within 10 feet of race.
Seeing him argue was, I mean, for me, like wanting to hold up later at a rock concert.
Mark has a vision of what justice involves. And what he's always looking for is a way of convincing the court to accept that view of the Constitution.
His starting point is to come up with a framing of an argument where the opposition is forced to defend the completely indefensible.
Around 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, an American voice said, "Get up."
Saddam Hussein received more due process, more respect for constitutional rights than Cyrus, who's a United States citizen.
First, they give me a list of my rights. I read them. I said, okay, so I have the right to an attorney? Yeah, I want an attorney. They said, well, yeah, but, you know, we don't have any here.
Within 10 days, he was cleared by the FBI, yet he stayed there for 55 days.
Anyone labeled an enemy combatant was toxic, and Mark Rosenbaum was the only person that took up the case. I'm not sure if he knew I was innocent. I think what he knew is it defies the fundamental ideas of our Constitution. If it had not been for front page articles on the New York Times and the LA Times, there's no doubt in my mind that I would have never gotten out when I did.
Working with the press and getting good coverage is an indispensable part of what's necessary to win cases.
And he's very good in front of the camera, and he tells reporters what they need to know.
I think he also sees cases as not just about things that are fought in court. They're about creating, in many cases, a public dialogue on an issue.
An election in which nearly half the population must use decertified punch card machines breaks the heart of democracy.
Breaks the heart of democracy? We can't have that.
You can't talk about the green pen without making fun of Mark a little bit. I mean, he is in that sense a dinosaur.
One of the first things I was taken by is walked into his office, I didn't see a computer.
Page after page of handwritten remarks.
I often say that I have nightmares of green letters attacking me.
Really, the history of civil rights litigation in California is now on yellow pads in green pen, filed away in the archives of the ACLU of California.
There is no civil rights issue that Mark hasn't had a hand in bettering and improving, and that's an extraordinary accomplishment, even over 40 years.
And I think that he's as eager to jump into the fray today as he was when he first started at the ACLU.
The homeless have been ignored for far too long in our society. We as a society have failed to make eye contact with this issue.
20% of the whole homeless population is veterans. 20%.
People were literally sleeping across the street from the VA campus, and that campus was being rented out to private commercial interests.
It's very explicit in the deed. The property was originally given to the government to house veterans. Mark saw the deep injustice of the situation. He just got fired up.
The VA could quite literally end veteran homelessness in Los Angeles if this land were used as it was intended.
There are people who are seen from the perspective of society as disposable, and he wants to arrive at the day when we stop throwing people away.
That's your car over there?
Yeah.
Who else drives that car?
Mommy.
And who does she take to school in that car?
Sister. Daddy. Sister, Daddy.
Yeah, that's right.
Every time, even when we worked until 11, 12 o'clock at night, we always had to take a break because he had to get home for dinner.
When I was thinking about becoming a parent myself, he said, you'll feel love in a new way, and you'll care so much more about your cases. It'll make you a better lawyer to be a parent. And he was so right.
You know, everyone has a positive opinion of Dad, but the more you know him, the more weird you realize that he is. Dad puts cinnamon in his pasta. His favorite song is Single Ladies by Beyonce. He just loves the way Beyonce sings.
One day I'm jogging home, and I see a guy with a beard who looks remarkably like Mark Rosenbaum. I said, "What are you doing here?" He says, "Well, I'm taking a comedy class over here on La Brea." I said, "You are taking a comedy course?"
Mark experiences life. He likes the experiences that make our life fuller and make our life more enjoyable. And it's not just the law, it is going to basketball games, it's coaching, and he likes life.
Anybody can take the right stand on issues, but it's not everybody who will stand in the right place.
It's not for any rewards for him. It's because he thinks it's the right thing.
He thinks people are good like I do. We couldn't do this work if we didn't think people were worth it.
He understood that even if we differed with your political views, your right should be preserved to freely speak out.
If it takes 10 years, if it takes 20 years, if it takes 23 years, he doesn't give up.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Abraham Joshua Heschel, we're proud of Mark.
I'm so grateful to get to have learned from him and worked for him, but also to live where he lives so that I can benefit from the justice that he's delivered for me.
ladies and gentlemen, the Executive Director of the ACLU of Southern California, Hector Villagra.
In the 18 years I've known Mark, I've never once spoken to him about justice, equality, or what motivates him. I never needed to. What he's done and what he still does today speaks volumes about what he believes. And justice isn't some abstract legal theory for Mark. It's about how the law affects people, whether they receive a quality education, whether they have somewhere to sleep, whether they're free to be with their families and friends, whether they feel respected by their government and welcome in their communities. I know this because Mark has given 40 years of his work life and spent countless nights and weekends apart from his family and friends to advocate for people whose rights have been violated. Mark cares just as deeply about other people's rights and freedoms as he cares about his own. And I know this because Mark's relationship to his clients is profoundly personal. He not only understands, but shares their feelings. Talk to Mark about his cases, and you know instantly that he feels just as angry, outraged, desperate, disappointed, and betrayed as they do. And that's why, as brilliant as Mark is, no matter how many parallel universes there may be, I bet that in every single one of them, he's a civil rights attorney. It's simply in his DNA to stand up for people, wherever they may be in the universe, who have been wronged. Mark, you're minting the kind of legacy that few lawyers can even dream of. In addition to the award we present you tonight, I offer you 2 tributes that come straight from our hearts. First, we've created this book for you. It includes messages of remembrance, congratulations, and thanks from your friends, colleagues, and students who I'm sure you know love, respect, and admire you. Second, as you all saw in the video, Mark doesn't use a computer. I'm not sure that he knows what one is or looks like. He just uses a yellow notepad and a trusty green pen. On all of your tables, you should be able to find a green pen. So please grab it and raise that green pen to salute a man who, thankfully for all of us, chose the path of social justice, the path of hope, and the path of love toward all people. To Mark Rosenbaum. Now please join me in welcoming 2 LA icons, our Executive Director Emeritus, Ramona Ripston, and former Los Angeles Mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa.
Good evening. It's so wonderful to see so many of you, so many people I knew and worked with. Thank you for coming tonight, and I want you to know that this is a big thrill for me, even though so much of what I'm about to say you've already heard on the video. But it is wonderful to be here. This is a very happy time for me. It's a very happy evening. I have the honor of presenting the Ramona Ripston Liberty and Equality Justice Award, which was presented to me when I retired. And I'm presenting it to one of the outstanding lawyers in this country, one who has dedicated his life to the pursuit of liberty, justice, and equality. I first met Mark Rosenbaum shortly after I came to Los Angeles to become the executive director of the ACLU of Southern California. I sat in on several meetings of the lawyers involved in the Pentagon Papers case, where I observed a number of highly respected senior lawyers plus one law school student discussing very difficult First Amendment questions. The law student, still enrolled at Harvard, was participating with strategy suggestions and legal originality of his legal theories beyond what anybody could imagine. I decided on the spot that when he graduated one semester later, he should join our staff and help mold the future of our organization. It was the best decision I ever made. We were struggling to survive financially at the time, the early 70s, but Stanley Scheinbaum, Max Pileski, and I got together the money necessary to hire a new young lawyer. And I'm very hesitant, and I won't tell you, I'm embarrassed to tell you how little the salary was. Mark will probably tell you. We all agreed that Mark would be essential to the future of the ACLU, and we hired him before anybody else could. Mark's promise turned out to be beyond what anybody would have dreamed of. He soon became one of the leading lawyers in America. To Mark, cases were about people. Nothing was abstract to Mark. He fought for his clients day and night because he knew them and they became the cause. In turn, he became a role model to young lawyers and to law students whom he taught from Michigan Law School to Peking University in China. And he became a hero to many of them, as well as to all those he represented. Mark fought for veterans who were homeless, for minority children whose schools did not provide enough books, whose classrooms didn't have enough desks, where the lavatory conditions were disgraceful, and where the children's education was in every way inadequate. Mark did not simply engage in a lawsuit. Mark created a crusade. He forced the state of California to set aside funds sufficient to provide minority children with a fair shake of state funding, and in many cases for the first time with a decent education. That crusade continues, and Mark's dedicated to the children represents and continues as well. Mark fought for affirmative action in California and elsewhere, and that battle continues. He also fought for equal rights on other fronts and succeeded along with MALDEF in invalidating Proposition 187. Which would have deprived undocumented persons of the health care and fair education, as well as governmental assistance of all kinds. That battle still goes on today, and though the tide turned with Mark's victory, and now the end of that fight may be upon us. I could go on forever explaining Mark's role in making the ACLU of Southern California the leading civil rights and civil liberties organization in the country, in helping to make this Constitution what it was intended to be, and in making life better for so many young people and for many others who were disadvantaged, many others who deserve this kind of help. They are human beings as well. Because you must all return to your homes tonight, I cannot tell you instead how proud I am of Mark Rosenbaum and how proud I am to call him my friend, and how grateful I am to be able to present him with the Ramona Ripston Liberty, Justice, and Equality Award. Congratulations, Mark.
I was introduced as the former mayor of Los Angeles, and what most of you don't know is that I was actually the president of this organization immediately prior to getting elected in 1994. And I worked with a badge of courage and respect. But I'm here tonight because Ramona calls. And when Ramona calls, you come. I was on my way to Saudi Arabia, and she said that my friend of 25 years, Mark Rosenbaum, was being honored tonight, and she wondered if I might say a few words. You saw that video, and that video chronicles just how important he's been to civil rights and civil liberties here in LA, and really across the nation as well. He is, without question, without peer, at least anyone that I've ever met and certainly worked with in the now almost 45 years I've been involved in civil rights. But I want to speak to the notion, to the lawsuit that he worked on with me in our schools here in Los Angeles. You know, this is a great town. I couldn't be prouder to have been mayor. Many of you know my grandpa got here 100 years ago. It's a great town that doesn't care who your father is in many respects. In my case, they don't care that I didn't have one. And with Judge Walker's decision, they don't care that you have two of them. But, and thanks to Stephen Reinhardt, by the way, for that. But very importantly, this issue of education and giving kids access to a quality public education isn't just a democratic issue. It isn't just an economic issue. It's a civil rights issue. When you look at the number of kids who are dropping out, who come from what is now the majority community here in LA, this should cause all of us to think long and hard. Well, I'll tell you, Mark understood that it's important for these kids to get quality teachers. It's important for them to get access to resources. He understood that this is a civil rights issue. And working with him, we took on the issue that in some of our schools, particularly the ones that I had in South LA, we were losing more than half of our teachers when the rest of the school district was losing about 6%. And he took on the issue, and he won. And he's won again and again and again. And for that, I want to thank him. We should all thank him. The kids who can graduate, and graduation rates are up in this town by about 20%, they owe a debt of gratitude to Mark Rosenbaum. So Mark, wherever you are, and I assume you're about to accept this award somewhere close, I want to thank you for the 25 years I've worked with you, but particularly for working with you on the Reed case. Thank you, Mark. Oh, you dressed up. I love it. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, first of all, thank you for being here. Thanks for what you've done for all these kids. Thanks for never disavowing you were part of the ACLU. Ramona, I'm going to say more about you in a moment, but if all you could raise was what you paid me that first year, you were not working that hard. I think everybody knows that I would not be up here and we all would not have achieved what we have achieved if it were not Ramona Ripston. And Ramona, we continue to do your work. And Hector, you've had huge shoes to fill, and you filled them and then some. It is such a privilege for all of us to continue to work with you. And I really don't know what to say about my kids. I really don't. I mean, Jonah, I could think of a few things. But Samara, I am so lucky to be your dad. Your mom and I were good parents, but we weren't that good. You are one amazing human being, and I am so proud you are part of my life. Thank you so much, Samara. And I want to thank your amazing crew, Sophie and Daniel and Danielle and Liza and Kevin and Benji and Brian and Chris and the people at Wondrous. You should know these young people, none of them are over 25 years old, and they put that together, and that was remarkable. Thank you so much. I do want to say that that video has answered one question that I have frequently been asked over the years, and that is, why did I grow a beard? You should not be laughing at that. I want to thank all of you for being here. I do not know how to thank you all for being here. And I want to thank so many of you for being there long before tonight. The first time I entered a courtroom, I was a second-year law student. I was very disaffected from law school. And what rescued me was a phone call from Gary Bello, who was then my clinical professor at Harvard. And Gary asked me if I wanted to fly down that afternoon to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and to help out Leonard Boudin, a legendary constitutional lawyer who was heading up the defense team for the Harrisburg 8. They were Jesuit anti-war activists, and they were being prosecuted for an alleged conspiracy to disrupt draft boards and to kidnap Henry Kissinger. And of course the defense was, what would you do with Henry Kissinger? The centerpiece of the Nixon administration's case consisted mainly of excerpts from, 20 or so letters which had been smuggled in and out of federal prisons by an FBI informant. Specifically, they were letters between Father Philip Berrigan and Sister Elizabeth McAllister, who were then serving brief sentences for their dissent against the Vietnam War. And the jury had had read to them by the government prosecutor, maybe a half dozen snippets, tiny, tiny snippets from all the letters. I remember sitting in the back of the courtroom listening to the beginning of the defense's closing arguments. And one of the arguments was presented by Paul O'Dwyer. Paul was a short Irishman. He had a huge mane of white hair. And he rose, and he raised the entire sheaf of letters. And in a rich Irish brogue that was more suited, I would have thought, to reading Keats or Shelley or Yeats, Paul told the jury that he wanted them to hear every word of those letters in their actual context. And so for the next couple of hours, Paul revealed love letters between Berrigan and McAllister, letters written to one another. And he related the hopes and the laments of dreamers who sought but a world at peace with itself. Distilled truthfully, as Paul had done, the letters were poetry, not criminal mayhem. And so the jury acquitted the Harrisburg 8 of all the serious charges. I think I discovered that day that the sacred responsibility of a civil rights lawyer was to find the ways to communicate the truth and the character of the individuals and communities he or she was privileged to represent. There is always a story ahead of us or by our side or just behind us, and we are in need of these narratives. That is precisely why justice nurtures the soul in places power too often shuns and at times even seeks to destroy. Because power often believes that it is beyond our collective capacity to change the world, to make it a better place. It is why we crave justice. It saddens me on this really special evening that so many of my mentors are no longer here to share in person this moment. And I'm not being one bit modest when I say that my role, whatever it is in these accomplishments, would have been unachievable without them. I miss my parents very much. I miss Gary Bello, who was the greatest teacher I ever had, and I miss Len Weinglass, who was the greatest lawyer I ever knew. I miss Leonard Boudin and Johnny Cochran and Bill Kunstler and Skip Glenn and Cesar Chavez and Kathy Krause and Derek Bell and Joyce Fisk and Harold Cruz and Bill Smith and Bob Brown and so many others. I owe them the greatest thanks. And it surely is not intended as any disrespect to the great lawyers in this room and with whom I have been privileged to work over the years. To acknowledge that those who have most filled my life with meaning never spent a day in law school. Like Eleazar Williams and Cindy Diego, who were students in the Williams case, students who proclaimed that they would not be denied their love of learning by virtue of their zip code, who took on the state of California, who took on their own schools, who took on a law firm the state paid over $20 million to argue that children in poor communities didn't need textbooks. What difference would it make, said the senior partner representing the state? They can't read anyway. Or the other students who Antonio and Ramona and Hector mentioned, who have been willing to reveal their educational deficiencies that others not be similarly denied. Or like Geronimo Pratt, a Black Panther and former Green Beret, who spent 28 years in prison, many in solitary confinement for a murder he did not commit, repeatedly rejecting the state's offer to release him if he would confess. Or like Maria Carbajal and Peter Guzman, who are here tonight. Peter, a citizen, a U.S. citizen, deported to Mexico. Maria, her mother who left her job at Jack in the Box, went through her meager resources, searched in the worst slums of Tijuana for 3 months, looking in morgues and riverbeds for her son, who was returned only by some force of good, and who said to us when the United States government offered a settlement, only accept it if you know this can never happen to another mother or son. Or like the undocumented laborers and students who risked deportation to publicly and successfully battle the racist Proposition 187. Or like Greg Valentini, a decorated hero of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, who was willing to reveal what he regarded as his shame at having to live on Skid Row to make public the shame of our nation in refusing to afford a home to the brave. Such courageous men, women, and children, some of whose names I know and most whose names I do not, treated by their government as outcast, yet they were fiercely refusing to accept compromise, to accept such fate. You all have empowered me. It has not been the other way around. For me, what is celebrated tonight is our community, our remarkable community. Nearly 2 months ago, when I was before the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice said to me, why can't we just take race off the table? Our community, by comparison, wants to know why we can't take poverty off the table, or bad schools off the table, or Skid Rows off the table. We are a community expanded by tears, not reduced by them. And for me, for the last 40 years, the cornerstone of that community has been the ACLU. The ACLU is tough, it is creative, and it almost never loses. The ACLU says to our government, stop being a wuss. Stop being a bully. Grow up, damn it. Live up to your word and give everyone a shot at the life of his or her dreams, because all of us matter. The ACLU is one part Upton Sinclair, one part Maya Angelou, and one part the Roadrunner. I am so fortunate to have been born to be an ACLU lawyer, to have been taken in by Stanley Scheinbaum, to have been inspired and permitted to help carry out the vision and the wisdom and the caring of Ramona, and now to be led by the quiet and no less fierce resolve of Hector Viagra. I have been privileged to work side by side for the past 4 decades with selfless colleagues here tonight, the finest men and women that money cannot buy. And if the ACLU has been my nuclear family with respect to civil rights and civil liberties, then the public interest community and its partners in the private sector, you all have been my extended family. You are so amazing. The truth is that I have probably spent more time with you all than with anyone else in my life. When I speak to my students who ask for advice what to do with their lives, what I say is that you should choose a life in which you can feel passion, and you all are the exemplars for that. We see such terrible things, such tragic injustices, such horrible indignities against those whom we represent, no, those whom we hold close to each other. And we need one another. I know I have. We need one another to share those truly awful moments with empathy and sometimes with humor. To all of you, I am grateful for your companionship, your warmth, your forgiveness, your laughter, and your grace. I love you all. I have always cherished words, especially words that can be written with a green pen. I cherish them because they bring reason and they bring shape, because they can fire up hope and compassion. I want to conclude tonight by sharing with you some words that were sent to me by one of my students in China. In my classes, at the end of each week, I always read a poem, and then I invite the students to bring poems into the classroom. And one of my students from China, when he heard about this event, sent me a note, said to me, "You know, Professor, I don't really remember much from your classes about law, but I do remember the poetry." And he sent this poem. It's called Love. It's written by Thomas Brown. I love you not because of who you are, but because of who I am when I am with you. To the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you may be the world. You all have been the world to me. I am so fortunate to have lived that life and to count you among my friends. I want to thank you for a night that I will never forget. Thank you very much.